Hey, families, your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and offering trauma healing groups throughout the year. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today I'm welcoming a sister in the ministry. She's doing work to help people to heal. Dr. Valencia Wiggins, PhD and licensed professional counselor. She's also an associate professor and clinical training director. And so she's doing a lot of work in the field. She completed her PhD in clinical psychology at Walden University, MA in clinical counseling from Wheaton Graduate School, and she has her own private practice, Valley Coast Counseling and Consulting Services. She works with individuals and families on a variety of issues. And she also is a member of Broadview Missionary Baptist Church in Broadview, Illinois. And so we're so glad to have you here to talk about our topic of today. Welcome, Dr. Valencia.
Thank you, Reverend Jocelyn. I'm so excited to be here with you on your podcast.
Yes, I'm grateful. I'm grateful, especially because of all the wealth of knowledge that you bring. And so we're going to dive into that. But I also am even more interested in your personal testimony surrounding the subject that we're talking about today. So let's actually kind of dive into a little bit about your history, your story, and your testimony.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, I've been a Christian since I was 7 years old and following the Lord ever since then. I had an interest in people and helping people, and so I ended up in the field of psychology and counseling. And so went to school for all that and training and have been working in the field for over about 25 years now. But I did have a story. It's funny as we were talking about this topic. I've never really shared it. I've gone through it, but it's surrounding losing a job and being terminated, and what that experience was like. I had worked for an organization, um, doing counseling with college students, and the organization hit some financial difficulty. So I discovered that I was going to be the one. I was chosen out of a few other counselors to be laid off from my job. And so I had been working at this organization for about 9 years or so. And I was in shock. I was in shock. I was devastated and grieving. I loved my coworkers. I had a good working environment, and so I was reeling, and so there was some things that I would have considered probably unfair. Why was it this person, that person, all those types of things you're going through, and then you start to doubt your ability as a counselor. It's like, am I what does this mean? There were so many things that and variables, and so I remember I'd found out on a Friday. And then I remember going home that weekend, talking to family and friends. And I remember one night of that weekend that I was sleeping and I felt this pressure. I've never experienced anything like this, but I felt a pressure on my chest, like something was bearing down on me, almost like it was something spiritual, or like that. But I remember praying, I just said the name Jesus and it lifted. Now I've never experienced anything like that, but in that moment, I knew that the Lord was going to walk me through this difficulty, and so I had to go back to work because I knew I had 6 weeks left. Didn't know what I was going to do, and so within 4 weeks, just to tell you how the Lord worked it out, I had another job before I left this job. Never had to use unemployment. And then they took care of everything that led me up into when I started my next job 2 months later. So never missed a paycheck, never was without anything. And even before that, how the job that I went to, I'd met somebody a year ago. The Lord brought them back to mind, and through all these different circumstances, I had another job before I left. Now I had to still work in the environment, which was stressful, and then painful to leave friends. And but one of the things is not to leave. I had prayed the Lord. I said I didn't want to leave with bitterness because I didn't want that in my spirit. I didn't want it to affect anything that was going to happen. But and that happened. The Lord brought me through that. But it also changed how I viewed work from then. From moving forward. Yeah. So that was just a little bit about my story, my experience with that, and being terminated and losing a job and coming through that.
Thank you for sharing. That is very challenging to lose a job, and challenging, I don't even think is a strong enough word. It is could be devastating actually to lose a job. For some people, I've heard stories where they worked at a place for 20 years or 30 years to be laid off, and no matter how nicely they try to package the layoff, there's some feelings associated with it. You might feel some type of way about this. You might be at a place where your world is flipped upside down. And so there's a couple elements of your story that I want to glean lessons from and kind of talk about how we might support someone who, first of all, either just found out that they're about to be let go of at a job or recently have been let go at a position, and they are struggling with the grief, bitterness, resentment, shock, a whole number of different things, and what they might do to help them to not stay in a place of bitterness or remaining in a whole other dark place that is difficult because of what they went through.
It's interesting when you think about your job. We spend if you work in a job for all those years, you spend 40 hours a week at a job. And that's 8 hours a day. And that's a significant amount of your time whenever you're doing and building relationships with people. And so then when that's taken away, like you said, how do you navigate that? So I think one thing that's important is to think about is what kind of support system do you have? I was just recently reading a research article that was talking about burnout for women on the job. And one of the things that's important is your interpersonal relationships. So you may have interpersonal relationships at your job, but also what does your support system look like outside of the job? That always has to be important and be strengthened. And so you'll need that support, because you need that. I would like to say in this field, a safe space, a safe place to be able to talk about things that are difficult. I would say another thing would be, I think going into a job, even what I've learned now is to hold a job loosely, and even in this world, our economy, nothing is for sure. I was just reading again about several companies that are going to be laying off people right at Christmas. So cope ahead, I'd say, prepare, always be thinking about, okay, if I were to lose this job tomorrow, what would I do? you know what is my next step? May not always be 20, 30 years. I don't know if we're seeing that people are staying on jobs that long even now today, but coping ahead, as far as if there's anticipated stress about a job, being prepared for that. Also, I think other support, if you need professional counseling, you know have that in place for someone to talk to as well. um I think, if you are to leave a job, to look back, record what were your successes, and not think that everything is wiped out for not, because you're going to take whatever abilities that you learned at that job and you're going to carry that forward into the next job or the next season. So don't forget that. Remember that. I think that's really important.
Yeah, nothing was wasted with what you experienced at the previous job. And, in certain cases, with what you experienced and how they took how they went about laying you off or letting you go, however we want to word it. Sometimes they might not have handled it well. And so there might be some anger. It might be you feeling like, oh, legally, I have certain things to pursue around this. And not everybody's case is different. So obviously, we're not telling you what to do, but there is a possibility of it being internalized on a deeper level that can cause either further damage if you're not able to work through the emotions. And so you talked about professional counseling, circle of care. Is there anything else that you can offer, even as it relates to faith or what someone might do who is really like they are on the struggle bus as it relates to all the emotions that they're dealing with?
Mhm. I would say, if I think about all those areas, like mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, if I think about spiritually, there may be, you may experience doubt, like, Lord, what are you doing? I may be angry at God. You brought me here, then you're leaving me here, you know? But then if you have, I think it's important if you have a pastor, if you're connected with the church, if you're blessed to have a connected with the church or a small group, to have individuals praying with you along the way, where where you may not be able to, maybe in the season you might be angry at God, but if you have a sister or a group that could say, "Hey, I'm praying for you during this season." While you're angry, the Lord is going to take care of you. I think about the verse that talks about the angel of the Lord encamps around those that fear Him. And even while you may be angry, the Lord is encamping around you, and having those reminders along with. There's going to be bad days. You're not going to feel well, you know, but then each day it might be maybe a little bit. You feel like, okay, I'm not as angry today. You know, maybe I can journal. There's a prayer. It's called I share it sometimes with my students in class. It's called the daily examine prayer, and it starts off with reflecting on the day and looking at gratitude. What are you thankful for? And then what the Lord is going to do the next day, praying about that, prepare me for the next day. They say even gratitude changes the chemistry of the brain. That shows research and prayer. So I think that's important as you're walking through this to remember as well.
Very helpful, very helpful. Now, you described a unique situation where you had to still remain on the job. I think you said 6 weeks
Yes,
after hearing the
6
news?
long weeks.
Ooh,
Yes.
ooh, 6 weeks, long weeks. So,
Long weeks.
whether someone is in a situation like you where they have to wait things out and stay on a job that they know they're going to eventually leave very soon, or they're just in a situation where it's just unhealthy on the job, like things are in a place where there's stress, there is tension of layoffs, and they don't know if they're going to get laid off and all these things. For purposes of your mental sanity and for you navigating this difficult time, what words of advice would you give someone?
I would say, maybe once you found out that you've been laid off and you have to go back to work, I would plan your day. What are you going to do? So, you know what? I'm going to go into work. I'm also going to, okay, for me, I'll just use myself an example. It's like, okay, I still wanted to leave with integrity and still do the job that I had to do. I still had uh, clients I had to care for. So I wanted to be present for them. I wanted to do that. I still had my colleagues. I didn't want to be bitter toward them or have attitude. So I knew whatever I needed to do. If it was lunch, we had to do that, or being present, I had to do that. So having the day planned ahead, I think is a good strategy, um, even to help with stress until you get into the job. And then once you're done with the job each day, again, how you gonna take care of yourself? You're gonna work out, you're gonna eat, you're gonna do something, you're gonna rest because this is emotionally exhausting and physically exhausting as well. So those are some of the things I would say to do.
That's good. That's helpful. Now, and sometimes I know we are praying women here, or whoever's listening, you're a praying person because you're listening to this podcast, you believe in God. But sometimes in a situation like that, you believe in Jesus, but you kind of like, but I'm not Jesus. And I feel like tearing down things in this place and telling who where to go and gossiping about such and such. This is the flesh talking right now. The flesh can get, spicy. So, I mean, to help someone when they feel like they want to vent, like that's a honest response. If you felt like you were wrongly treated, sometimes our trauma response is to want to talk about it, but it could be difficult to stay professional in that environment. Kudos to you regarding how you were able to handle that. But if someone is at a place where they feel like they just wanna go tear down the walls on their way out the door, talk to them right now.
Mhm, mhm. You know, that's a good question. I always say, play the movie all the way out. Okay, if you wanted to tear Dawes Wall, what would happen? You know, what would happen? But this is where important. I think journaling is important. Writing things down. I do a technique. There's a technique. It's called narrative therapy. Really, where you're telling your story. Okay, so as you're thinking about those things, write down those things. You know, I have my clients sometimes if they're angry at somebody, write a letter. There's two letters that you write. There's one that you don't send. You can say everything you want in that letter. Get it out. You're angry, everything right in that letter. And then the letter that you do send and filter that and say what you do. I had to do that for myself before I left that job. I wrote a letter, and I was able to state what I needed to state, but professionally. But I had to write two letters. One where I said all sorts of things, just like and then I was able to write the letter that I needed to write, you know. So and that was closure for me as well.
That's helpful. Yeah, and I think that, for some, I give it this advice. I wish I had someone to give this advice to me early on because I would have made some of the mistakes that I did, but it's also helpful to have a counselor or someone who's a trusted colleague to sometimes even help you read the letter first or the email. Like, I always say, when you get to typing and them keys are flying and, I don't send that." You need to talk to somebody. You need because, those emotions that you feel are so real, and it's important, as you mentioned, to get it out because you do have to get it out on paper, but it does
Mhm.
not mean that you need to send it. Or if you have to talk it out, that's when you work with a counselor or someone to help you to process the emotions. Because the last thing we want you to do is keep it all inside. But we also don't want to be destructive either in our response. And so having those techniques are important. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. I like when you're talking about that. I do a technique. It's called the empty chair. If you're with a counselor, they'll have you talk to that empty chair.
That's a really good technique. And so talking to the empty chair, getting it out, letter writing, and there's a number of different techniques. But we realize that we are human and we're in a vulnerable place. And there's a lot to process when we are transitioning from a job. And you were blessed to have something lined up before you even walked out the door. But for some, they don't necessarily have that same outcome initially. They might be leaving a job and be unemployed for some time. And for some of us, especially if you've been at a job for 30 years, we don't realize how much of our identity and who we are and our role is kind of could be wrapped up in that position that's no longer there. So this time of unemployment and trying to rediscover or even trying to shift gears, it can be really a confusing, scary time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and letting go of that identity. If you were a CEO or you're a manager, where maybe you might have been in a position of power, all of a sudden you don't have that anymore. And then realizing what have I been holding on to, and so like I was talking about for me, it changed how I enter any job now. I hold it with loose hands because I can be moved at any time. But and then I think that's why it's important. I think relationships. outside of your job? Where are you investing your time? Whether it be your church or ministry or missions, um, having that full, balanced, a well-rounded life, um, I think is important as well. Because our jobs, and especially I'll say this to Reverend Jocelyn, I'll talk to our singles if this might happen, our single men and women, because our jobs can become our identity. Because we don't have a family per se, we don't have children, or if we're involved in church, and so it does become our identity, and so working through that if that changes as well.
Wow, that's spot on. For me, I know that to be true because when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I was in a position for over a decade where I was a director of a nonprofit. And that's how I introduced myself. I so correlated my identity with my role. And it took me some time to get out of that because that's what I do. That was my current assignment at that time, but that was not who I am. There's so much more to this woman named Jocelyn, just like there is so much more to you. And I think
Hmm.
for me, I was in my mid-30s when I transitioned from that role, but I think transition as you get older could be more challenging. I've talked to
Absolutely.
women who are older, who might be in their 50s or 60s, and they're transitioning and they're still trying to, there's ageism is real, unfortunately, even though people don't acknowledge it. And so struggling with like ageism in the workplace, re-entering, starting over at an older age, there's challenges there. And so if there's someone who's listening right now who is transitioned or has transitioned from a job and they are older and they are scared because of the difficulties that are lying ahead, what words of encouragement could you offer them?
I would say that there's still a purpose for your life. I had a colleague of mine say that if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. So, and I'm learning this even as myself, I'm getting older. Um, there's always going to be something else for you to do. Whatever skills you've had, that you've developed over decades, that's still going to be useful. So you are still useful. Those of you who are in your 50s and 60s and 70s, um, even 80s. If we look at our Supreme Court, there are people in their 80s on the Supreme Court. So there's still work for you. God has so much for you to do. You're not done. So I just want to encourage those that are listening. It's not the end.
That's good. I think that's such a beautiful way to close, but I did wanna ask if there was anything else that you would like to share just around the topic in general, around this journey of employment and new jobs and transitions.
Yeah, and I want to encourage those that even if you are in the season, um, the season is for a moment. I don't know how long the moment is, but you will come through this. But then what's happened, the pain that you experience will be used later. It's not wasted. Pain is not wasted. Tears are not wasted. God collects every tear, and it's important. So I just want to encourage those that are, if you're experiencing something like that, that it's not the end.
It's not the end. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Valencia, and tell us how we can get in touch with you if we ever wanted to connect in the work that you're doing.
Sure, you can contact me by email, drvwiggins@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at Valley Coast Travel on Instagram. So that's how you can reach me.
Perfect, perfect, and we'll make sure to put the email address in the show notes. Thank you, Dr. Valencia, for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation today.
Thank you, Reverend Jocelyn. I've really enjoyed this time with you.
Yes, yes, and I know you did as well, my audience. Thank you for tuning in. This is such a real life conversation as many of us have experienced these transitions, but just remember, it's not the end. And so I thank you for tuning in today. And if you are looking for a Christian counselor that you can plug into, be sure to reach out to us on our website at faithonthejourney.org. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, you know what to do. Please share it with a friend and leave a 5-star review to help us to get this message out to the world. So that's it for this week. Thanks again for tuning in, family. And until next time, you stay encouraged and you keep your faith on the journey. I'll see you soon, family.